Step 1.
Start the tying thread on a regular shanked hook. Snap it to remove the excess. I'm going to cover the hook shank completely with tying thread and then return it up to the hook eye.
Step 2.
I'm now going to tie in a pair of monofilament eyes. I'm going to figure eight them into place. Take tying thread and go over and under and around the eyes to secure them.
Do you always tie the eyes in first on these particular flies?
Yes, on any pattern that has eyes, I like to tie them in first. That way I have a start and an end point and I don't accidentally run out of room. I found when I was first learning to tie flies that quite often I ran out of room at the front of the fly because I'm concentrating on the fly one step at a time, tail, body, and I just run out of room to put the eyes on. This helps keep the fly honest and ensure it's balanced.
Step 3.
For the tail, I'm going to take a section of strung marabou fibers and strip them from the stem, trim off the butts to aid the tying process, use a soft loop, and then bind in further, secure the tail material down the shank of the hook, right to the bend.
Is marabou the material of choice for this?
It is on many damselfly pattern because of its soft, mobile nature in the water, and it really gets slender.
Step 4.
For the rib, I'm going to use some fine copper wire. I'm going to bind that in place along the near side of the hook.
Step 5.
For the shell back, I'm going to tie in a small length of pearlescent mylar. This again adds a little reflective sheen to the fly and a little attractive glint. Again, we're trying to make our flies stand out in a crowd and make the fish choose our flies over the natural nymphs.
Step 6.
For the body, I'm going to use the same plume of marabou, strip off 6 to 8, maybe 10 strands of marabou, grasp them by the tips, trim the tips even, and then tie the marabou in place by the tips. And this is important because although the tips are somewhat fragile, when we wind the body forward, the fly will adopt the natural tapered look by the way the fibers radiate out. It starts narrow at the tail and progressively gets wider as we progress towards the head, just like the natural nymphs. Those little fibers are moving in the water all the time and help suggest life as well. We'll just tie those off and trim off the excess.
Step 7.
With the body now complete, I'm going to take the pearl mylar and pull it over top of the body and secure it in place.
So in this case with the mylar, it's an actual attractor as opposed to a function of gas building up in the nymph?
Yes, it is. And pearlescent mylar is great for that because it's very subtle. It's not bright or garish by any nature. It just sort of mirrors the natural colors of the body materials you've chosen. So with that mylar in place, we're now going to take our fine copper wire and counterwind the rib in the opposite direction we wound the body to further reinforce it, provide nice segmentation like the natural nymphs, and again a little more attractive flash of perhaps a different color. A little contrast is always good. Again, things in nature tend not to be the same color. We'll break the wire off.
Step 8.
For the wing case, we're going to use some stretch flex or scud back. I'm going to trim it to a point to aid tying in, bind it in place directly behind the eyes, and secure it backwards onto the body slightly.
Step 9.
For the legs, I'm going to use a marabou plume, the same material I use for the tail and body. I'm looking for a feather that has long tips that have little or no web. I now trim out the very tip section of the feather.
This looks like a fairly efficient way to make some legs.
Well, what we're doing here, AJ, is we're able to take advantage of the fact that the fibers are still attached to the stem of the feather, and it keeps them in control. We want to make sure our legs are sparse. Remember, we're only trying to imitate or suggest 6 individual legs of the natural nymph. We're going to tie those legs in place with the tips protruding out in front of the fly, directly behind the eyes, and their overall length is about half the shank length. Going to bind them securely in place and trim away the excess fibers.
Step 10.
For the body, once again, we're going to use the same marabou plumes. I've taken about 4 individual fibers and stripped them off the feather. I've pinched away the butts, and I'm just going to simply spin them onto the tying thread to form a very narrow dubbing noodle. Again, you can moisten your fingers to help control and position the material. I'm going to wind those forward to form a neat little thorax. If you have too much on, don't wind it on. Simply strip it off the thread, and then come in and, using my finger as a shield, push the thread out of the way and trim off the excess.
Step 11.
I've rotated the fly so we can see the legs better, divided them into 2 equal clumps, and secured them down each side of the thorax directly behind the eyes of the fly. Our first wraps are somewhat loose to position, and then once we're happy with the placement of the legs, add additional securing wraps. Trim away that little excess plume. Nice divided and even legs.
Step 12.
Now take our wing case material, pull it over top of the thorax, hold it in place, and bind it down directly behind the hook eyes. And fold it back out of place. Do not trim the excess.
Step 13.
As we've done with the thorax, we're going to take another 2 or 3 individual strands of marabou, pluck out the stiffer butt section, pluck away the very tips, and simply spin it onto the tying thread to form a dubbing noodle. Again, keep the dubbing noodle sparse. Moisten your fingers to help the dubbing process. Essentially, you want to change the thread color to match the marabou plumes. Very sparse. Holding the wing case material back out of the way, work that dubbing noodle in and around the eyes to mask the thread and build the head.
Step 14.
Pull the wing case material over the top between the eyes, bind it down directly at the hook eye.
Are you stretching the skyback material quite tight?
Reasonably tight. It helps reduce bulk, but not too tight that the elastic nature of the fly starts to work against me by pulling materials out underneath the thread wraps when I finish the fly.
Right.
I'm going to carry the tying thread up over the top and then bring the wing case material back over the head and bind it in place directly behind the eyes.
Step 15.
We're going to place our whip finish directly behind the eyes of the fly. This helps accentuate the head and really make it stand out like the natural nymphs.
Step 16.
Take the wing case material now, and using our thumb and forefinger, cup the material and trim it on about a 30-degree angle. This creates the natural notched look of the real damselfly nymph. The Pearly Damsel. An example of how you can use one material to form almost the entire fly, tail, body, and legs.